So the Olympics have just been completed, and I love, as many people do, different events. One of the things that I am most interested in is the gymnastics. And I did a little bit of research, and I found out that the average height of a female gymnast champion in the Olympics is about 5 feet 1 inch. I also did a little bit of research because I'm interested in basketball, or what the average height of the NBA player is, and that's about 6 feet 7 inches. Stark contrast, of course. And there is a understanding, or there is a reason, a rationale behind why our female gymnasts tend to be shorter in stature than our male basketball players. And the rationale is, of course, because of the demands of the sports that they play. In gymnastics, what is really, really important is speed, agility, and a great center of gravity. And that normally is found in persons of somewhat shorter stature. Whereas in basketball, of course, you need the agility, but you also need that height and that ability to stretch and to be flexible in order to be closer to the basket and obviously score more points. So what that intimates, or what it suggests to us, is that structure is heavily dependent upon the function and upon the strategy. And so therefore structure in some regard serves the strategy in which it is actually implemented. And that's really, really important, because you might wonder, while we're in a chapter that discusses or is focused on decision making, we start off with a discussion of organizational structure. You might say, well, you know what? That's better suited for our second management process, organizing. And you would be right to some degree. But you cannot discuss planning and decision making without really appreciating the connectivity between the organizational structure and the organizational strategy of the firm. And so as the firm plans, remember, planning is about what I want to achieve, my goals and my objectives, as well as how I am going to go about doing that, i.e. my strategy. As you go about really determining your plan, you have to as well simultaneously devise the structure, devise the framework that is going to assist you in implementing that strategy successfully. And so when we talk about structure, it is very, very important to recognize its role and its connection to organizational planning. What I love about your text as well is that it demonstrates, just like when we talked about management and leadership, there is no right or wrong structure. Okay? Structures, as I've just mentioned, are contingent upon the function and the strategy for which they are devised and for which they will be implemented. And so to suggest that one structure is better than another without clearly identifying what the structure was created to do is rather inconsistent, or I would say problematic. It's, of course, as your book mentioned, that as we have evolved in terms of organizations, in terms of the way that we approach organizations, certain structures have become less popular than others. And so most firms in contemporary organizational society will not necessarily rely heavily on structures that we will call, or we would identify as mechanistic. Those are structures with highly centralized decision-making process, very rigid, very hierarchical, i.e. very tall, very small spans of control, and a certain level of bureaucracy that limits the firm's ability to react quickly to the environment. Of course, the reason why those types of structures are less popular than the structures that we will identify or call organic, those that are more decentralized, those that are flatter, those that allow for greater flexibility and mobility, those that are heavily dependent on people within the ranks of the organization, not necessarily management, but just general employees within the organization making specific decisions. Those types of organizations are of course much more popular, much more suitable in today's environment because of a number of factors. One, hyper competition. The fact that firms are competing with many other firms requires organizations to react and to react very quickly. That, along with high volatility in the environment, things are changing rapidly. Laws are changing, people's needs, societal needs, technology is changing. So again, the company has to, organizations have to be rather flexible. And then also thirdly is that we've moved away, as we discussed in earlier chapters, we moved away from just this classical scientific approach to management, which was more of a direct and command, to a more human relations approach where the individual, the organizational employees are seen as major players, major sources of intellectual capital, and then organizations try to tap into that and therefore try to create structures that allow individuals in the organizations to be able to use that intellectual capital in their decision making. So that's to say that yes, some organizational structures are less suitable today than they were, let's say, 50, 60 years ago. And that's why many organizations look the way they look. However, we must be careful to not simply suggest that all organizations should be flat, or all organizations should be decentralized, or all organizations should be rather flexible. That has to be, or that has a place, of course, in today's society. But we must be careful that if we are moving, or we have a strategy that focuses, let's say, on more of an efficiency, more of a control and standardization, that we do want to have a level of hierarchy or a level of, centralization that affords that. Okay, so it's whatever the organization is really going after, whatever the organization strategy is dependent on, is going to be what influences the strategy. Of course, as organizations themselves evolve, the structure will likely evolve with it. Just like when you build houses and families get bigger. My wife and I, we watch a fair bit of HGTV, and oftentimes we'll watch look at shows where people are trying to buy a new house, and many times the reason they're buying this new house is because they're having more kids, and as they have more kids, the kids need obviously more room. The people need more room in the house, and so they try to find ways to expand expand their housing situation. Similarly, as organizations grow, as they evolve, as they take on more and more challenges, as they serve more and more needs, they tend to evolve in terms of their structure as well. And your book discusses that to some regard. It looks at a functional structure, very simple structure when the firm essentially begins, right? It's kind of creating maybe one of or a few products and services. It's easier, right? You can have everything kind of structured very simply, very functionally. As the organization grows, however, if it expands into different products and services, or if it expands into different types of customers or processes, or even as it expands internationally, geographically, that complexity then requires the firm to grow and to then evolve and expand its structure in different ways. You have the functional approach, you have a process approach, you may have a product or project approach, or divisional approach, if you will, a geographic. All of those different structures, again, are dependent upon where the firm is, what the firm is doing, what the firm is trying to implement in terms of its strategy. So that's really what I wanted to get to you, get at the heart of today, is to recognize that structures serve a purpose, and they are therefore dependent upon what the firm is attempting to achieve. There are no perfect structures. Okay, just like when we spoke about leadership and management, they have significant advantages, but they also have significant drawbacks. And you have to appreciate that as you look and as you determine which types of structures you want to implement in your organization. For example, if you're going after a functional structure, one of the greatest advantages of that is that it's pretty streamlined and easy in terms of management, and there's great coordination between different functional areas. Everybody in accounting is together. Everybody in sales and marketing may be together. That's the coordination. The problem is, though, again, as you are functional, you tend to focus more on your functional areas than the entire organization. So functions almost become these mini organizations in and of themselves, and they don't see the connection between them. Because again, remember why structures were created. Structures were created to allow firms to break apart what needed to be done, therefore to help and to promote this idea of specialization of labor. So we have these major tasks to achieve, and in order to achieve that, we have all of these different specific steps and roles. And by breaking it up and allowing individuals to do just specific things, it promoted this idea of specialization. You don't have to focus on everything. You just do what you do really well. And that, of course, encourages and promotes efficiency in the organization. But when you break things apart, if they are, of course, working together towards one individual, a major objective or goal, you have to find a way of bringing that together and coordinating that activity. And that's also what structures are supposed to do. They're not just about a separation of roles and responsibilities, but they're also about coordination of those roles and responsibilities together. And those different structures try to do that. The functional break it apart in terms of the functional, of course, the process or the project breaking it apart, and product breaking it in terms of the processes that the organization pursues. Similarly, in terms of products or even geography, the different geographic areas. The trick is, once you break it apart, how do you bring it together? And so, you hear or you've been introduced to this idea of the matrix. And again, the matrix sounds like it's this wonderful compromise where organizations can kind of have the best of the efficiency that comes from the functional structure. We can have that specialization, that deep, coordination, but then it can also have the great flexibility that comes from, a project or a product approach. That is true to some regard, but again, by introducing this whole idea of having two bosses, let's say, that encourages even more complexity. So there is downsides to all these different approaches. That's what I want you to get. Just like when we talked about management and leadership, just because, companies that are successful today, big players, if I want to use the term sexy companies like the Googles and the Apples, they tend to promote this flat structure, huge democracy. Everything's just kind of, more informal. Employees get a chance to be part of decision making. You can kind of do what you need to. Even in those organizations, there is a level of centralization. There's hierarchy, there's rules, there's procedures. It's not just a free-for-all. So there is in many times cases where there is a blend of the organistic or the organic and the mechanistic, okay, which is again that structure and that rigidity. You have to find that good balance that works for you, that allows you to be efficient and allows for a level of control, but also encourages and promotes an idea of flexibility and agility in your movement. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. Hope it kind of gave you some things to think about as you process, as you evaluate organizational structures.